Welcome to another episode of Euphoric, the podcast. I'm sitting here with Anne Skriba, who is the owner of Clean Play Coaching, a 5X certified coach, and a former basketball coach for college athletes, as well as an athlete herself. And I can't wait to talk a little bit more, Anne, with you today about the interplay between athletics and going alcohol free and just the
Yeah.
identity shift that happens. But before we move into that, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited. It's kind of a whirlwind to think, a couple months ago you were on the Clean Play podcast and, fast forward here we are in yours. So I'm really, really happy to be here.
Yes, me too. Tell me a little bit more about your mission and how you specifically like integrate athletics and sports into your brand.
Yeah. I mean, so Clean Play coaching, obviously also relates, but not in the same way to the Clean Play podcast. The Clean Play podcast I do with Chris Marshall, obviously a pioneer in the alcohol-free space, but it really just Clean Play coaching came out of how I was able to relay my experience as I was getting and staying sober and kind of coming into my identity as an alcohol-free person. I always found myself using athletics to paint the picture of what I was experiencing. And I noticed, in sober circles I was in, friends, family, that that storytelling through athletics resonated with people whether or not they were really into sports or not. It was something that people could instantly connect to, instantly understand. And it just made some more complex things, especially if you're talking to someone who's not alcohol free and understand like why and what do what's the point? It really just gave a lot of help understanding, through the lens in the vehicle of sport. And so I think, everyone can relate to what athletes do, in terms of, pursuing greatness, pursuing being the best version of themselves. And so I just wanted to marry the two things that have become most important to me in my life, as of right now, which is, pursuing an alcohol-free lifestyle and my love for sports and the identity of athletes and merge them into what is now clean play coaching.
Yeah, that's so fun. Like I can't wait to go into that deeper. And so what is your like story and background as an athlete yourself?
Yeah, as an athlete, I mean, I grew up, I knew I wanted to play college basketball at 2. I told my mom when I was 2 years old I want to go to Duke. And so from a very young age, I grew up in the 90s, so that was when Michael Jordan and, the Bulls were the thing. And so I came up at a really interesting time in the sports landscape. Obviously, you had NBA. Kobe Bryant is my, hero. But women's basketball was also coming of age in the 90s, in the 2000s, and so much more as far as women being able to step into the sports world. And so I set my sights to being a college athlete very, very early on. As soon as eighth grade, I started lifting. I started, doing everything. I was waking up at 4 a.m. I was getting to the gym. And, I really pursued that my entire young adult life. And so I was able to follow that all the way through high school and then be able to play college basketball at the Division 2 and Division 3 level. And then right after I got done playing, I jumped right into coaching. I wanted to stay around the game. I wanted to make an impact. And so this through line of coaching, I'm sure we'll talk about through the episode, but it's something that's always been a part of my story. But I fell in love with the game of basketball at a very young age and still very much am in love with it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Like, congratulations. That just made me like
Thanks.
almost get teary-eyed of just seeing someone pursue their dream. Some things that we think are really hard or impossible. I
Yeah.
think I think you're right. The way that athletics gets us to see that like, wow, anything is possible when you work hard enough, it really encapsulates that. And it shows how capable like a average human can be, right? Because we're
Yeah.
all born with the same bodies and the same, kind of physical
Right.
limitations or so. And then it's like, wow, when you hear the way that Kobe Bryant or you hear the way that Michael Jordan pushed himself, they're not average anymore. They took whatever they're born with and they formed it literally into
Yeah.
this gold based on this perseverance and this consistency that they molded. And it took a lot of practice. Like they had the raw talent, but wasn't it Michael Jordan who was like denied from like a high school basketball,
Yeah, he got cut from
right?
his high school team. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like maybe there was like obviously the talent there, and some people have more talent than others, but it's like it's really truly the story of this is what happens when you push yourself and when you really see what you're capable of. And I think people love sports for that reason and other kind of things like that, personal development and stuff like that. So I'm curious, how did alcohol start playing a role in your
Yeah.
life at the same time?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny because I remember when we, we're going through the certification program, this is something you touched on, but it also is one of those things where it's like you really think your culture is unique when it comes to alcohol. And I grew up in Wisconsin, in the Midwest. And so from a very young age, alcohol was surrounding me. I think I had my first sip of alcohol when I was a toddler. My uncle like sneaked it to me. And it was funny. Everyone was laughing at the family get together. I'm sure much to my mom's chagrin, but it was just constantly everywhere. It was, how you celebrated, it was how you mourned, it was how you came together. And so it was just a constant fixture. And I think we're obviously in a very different age, but I think I grew up in the time when alcohol was still seen as cool. All of the kids in my high school, we were trying to drink on the low. However, obviously, I was an athlete. I was someone who wanted to excel in academics to be able to go and play in college. So very early on, I kind of developed this kind of double life where on one hand, I was a star athlete and I was a very good student. And then I also kind of had this kind of sneaky life where I was, drinking and partying, but always had my sights set, obviously, on the end goal, which was to play college basketball. And people in my family also struggled with alcohol. So there was also that influence that really made me which I didn't even know I had words for then, but I knew I was going to be a functional drinker because I wasn't going to allow alcohol to get in the way of my goals or my dreams. But it also was very much important for me to be able to relieve stress and be able to kind of have that rebellious part of me satisfied. And so as far as I can remember, alcohol was just a main character in my life.
Yeah. And I'm really curious because you had this goal for so long, like get to college basketball, be a college basketball athlete, a huge deal, like to get to that point. And I think a lot of us also might have had these goals when we were younger of, get really good at soccer, get really good at
Yeah.
ballet, and you keep moving on and on. And most of our journeys did end in college, right? Because
Yeah.
not that many people then go on to become pro in these kind of areas. And for me, for example, I danced ballet. I actually started when I was quite late. So I started like around 12-ish. So that's
Okay.
quite late for a
Yeah.
ballerina. But I did it religiously in middle school and high school. High school, I was at the ballet studio every single day, every evening, 3 hours a day, Saturdays, 8 hours for like practices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was rehearsing, I was doing shows, and I did want to go pro. There was a part of me that wanted to go pro, but it was so competitive and I didn't feel like that I was good enough basically, and that I would have a better shot at college, and that maybe I don't want to be a ballerina forever. So, I just kind of made this sensible choice. But then, your life evolves. You had this one very hardcore identity where you do
Yeah.
practice and you do wake up early and you do make all these good choices. And then you kind of shift. Now you're the version of yourself who's like over the hill, even though we're
Yeah.
still so young, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in terms of athletics, you're like over the hill. So I'm curious, like once you started losing this identity of a pro athlete and, becoming someone who, was just moving on with their adult life and kind of settling into like what that means for you, how did you grapple with that identity change? And also, how did alcohol play a role then?
Oh yeah, that's a really great question. So yeah, like I said, I as soon as I graduated college, I started coaching. I got my first college coaching job at 23, which is pretty young. And so, I did that for about 6, 7 years. And, again, that's your life, especially as a coach. It doesn't matter if you're coaching, Division 1 at like a school like UCLA or you're coaching at a junior college, like it is your life. It's not a 9 to 5. You don't have off season. It's constant with recruiting, being on the road during the season, after season. And so, yeah, that wholly was my identity. And that's how I would identify myself and introduce myself. I coach at, it was that serious of an identity. And so then, it came to a point where I realized that the lifestyle, because I'd moved, I think 4 times in the 7 years that I coached. So the stability wasn't necessarily there. I moved, hours away each time, and it just became harder and harder to keep up and sustain. And if you're not moving up, it's hard to constantly do lateral moves as a college coach because the money's not there. You're still working, a ton of hours and things like that. So I had to come to this realization that I needed to have a more quote unquote stable job. And that included walking away from this love of mine that I had, which was coaching and working with these players that I obviously developed relationships with. And so that was the impetus of moving here to Florida. And so I moved and took a job in sales, which was not necessarily for me. I was good at it, I was good at it because I can talk and it's competitive and things like that. But once I actually moved away from where I was coaching and got down here to Florida, alcohol again became the center. And so at that point, I was still pretty young and I would just rationalize it away. At happy hour, I'm gonna go to happy hour. Like I work hard, I work 8 hours a day. I also was working from home. And so like that was 2019 that I moved down here. You move into COVID, but it wasn't very shortly after that that I went from being a college basketball coach to a salesperson. And that was like jumping off of a cliff, identity wise. And so alcohol became more and more part of every day. It became, I would get up and go play basketball pickup, not the same as like actually training and competing, but I go play pickup at 4:30 and I would stop at the gas station on the way home. I knew what time they opened because of course, as a drinker, all these things. So at 7 o'clock, I'd get some alcohol, drink it, go and work, 8, 9, 10 hours. And then right after that, I'm drinking, going to happy hour. And then after that, I'm drinking a little bit more before I go to bed to essentially pass out. And that was my life on repeat for years until I got sober after I moved here.
Yeah. I mean, wow, like what a huge shift. You can see it exactly as like the story goes that that second that you lost the identity of the athletics as your profession, and now you're like, whatever that guy does in the office.
Right.
Right? The drinking picks up so much. And I think that's so fascinating because I've spoken to a lot of women who had kind of is not the exact similar story, but like there was a life rooted in athletics. And once,
Mhm.
maybe they had their first baby and they just couldn't move their body like that anymore, or whatever it was, like you just kind of lose that piece of yourself. And even for me, I love to still move my body, obviously. And I love ballet, but I feel like it's so far away. You know what I mean? Like to get
Yeah.
back into it would be so hard. And you have such a high standard from where you used to be when
Yeah.
you're younger, which is why it makes it even, I think, harder sometimes to get back into it. And you hurt yourself because you're trying so hard and all that kind of stuff. So it is a huge, huge shift into that. And then, that alcohol piece just becomes so normalized in society. So, like, what
Yeah.
else are you going to do? So, what finally got you to start thinking differently about this and starting to, claim a more sober, curious path for yourself?
Yeah, yeah, this is a really important piece of my story, and I try to share it every single time. So, I found myself working this sales job, and I found myself taking shots of tequila to even get out of bed to sign on to this job. It's like the 1,000-pound laptop to open it up and do the calls and all of that. And so after, a couple months of that, and also, just a downward spiral of, everything from suicidality to depression, others in my life, which was interesting because for my entire life, especially being a coach and kind of being the motivational one, everyone would come to me for, inspiration, motivation. And so when it finally came to the point where I was not okay, the people in my life were like, we don't know what to do with you because you always got some sort of Kobe Bryant inspiration, or you always know what to do and how to kind of push through and power through. And it came to the point where I no longer could power through. And so that's when, people in my life had a more serious conversation where like, I really think you need help because this trajectory is not going to go well. And so that was the impetus for me to consider starting therapy. And I actually canceled my appointment. I signed up and then I canceled the appointment. And then a good friend of mine was like, no, I really think you need to go to this appointment. And so I did. And so I still have that therapist to this day. We've been going for 3 years now, but I ended up leaving the sales job. That was like the first kind of pillar of like actually choosing what I wanted because I was trying to hold up the societal conditioning of like, this is a good job, you have a good job, you just get through it. You suffer at work, that's what it is. And that's why the drinking picked up because that's what everybody else was doing. Yeah, I hate my job, but I go drink at night so I can just get through it. And so I left that job, which was a really hard thing because I felt like I failed and I felt like I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle it. And so after that, after a little while with my therapist, she had said something to me where we were like starting to get a little bit sober curious. I did not have any intention of getting sober. That was not why I went to therapy. I went to therapy to quote unquote get better or to heal or to feel better. And so after a couple months, she was like, well, what do you think about, your relationship with alcohol? And I don't know. And so she asked me to track how much I was drinking in a week, which I was like, you don't want to know that. Like like, you don't want to know. But I did it, and it was, jarring to me what had become so normal to see it on paper. I was like, oh my, wow, that's a lot. And so we got to the point where I had just thought about it, like what might it look like if I decide to not drink? And she said something to me, and she said, you've done a masterful job at surviving your whole life. You've done a great job of surviving. And it seems like alcohol has been your main tool of survival. And she just said, would you like a new set of tools? And that was like something that I had never considered before. And I think what was so beautiful about it is she knew me, and she knew she couldn't tell me what to do. And she knew that she wasn't going to send me to AA or any of these other things. What it was an invitation to more. What it was an invitation to better, to more purpose, to more fulfillment. And truly, that's why I fell in love with basketball in the first place. It broadened my landscape. It opened my eyes, and so that was the same type of invitation that my therapist gave me that day. And so then I said, okay, what might my life look like, and what are these new tools that I could possibly use?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a poignant story. And I love, love, love that you had that person to go back and forth with it like that. And, it's really sad, but I've heard some horror stories sometimes when people open up about alcohol with their therapist because they're not always trained on that. And
No.
they're very well meaningly sometimes just shoving them into AA. Not that it doesn't help some people, but they just
Right.
don't know how to handle it. So they're like, here, this will handle it? And so for someone to be able to actually have a conversation and dissect it and really say the things that are going to motivate your brain instead of feeling like you need to rebel against what she's saying and really understand it and think about it in a different way. So so amazing. And I wish everybody really had that. That's why
Yeah.
obviously I love coaching and to prepare coaches
Same.
and train people to be able to do this. So okay, what happened next? Like you have the seed planted, but how did
Yeah.
you really start to build an alcohol-free life after that?
Yeah, so I mean, part of that was she also recommended I read Quit Like a Woman, Holly Whitaker's book. And so that was really, really helpful. I loved the rebellious aspect of it. I loved how she talked about like alcohol doesn't set women up in our culture and capitalism and misogyny and all of these things. And so then, I did get involved a little bit hesitantly in a community, a sober community from there. And so then she asked me, she was like, okay, can you try like one day? You just try one, like a couple days sober. And she's like, can you give me 2 days? Like, what's the longest you've been without drinking? I was like, 2 days. And she's like, okay, try two. And then, of course, because I'm an athlete and I like to, be an overachiever, I did four. And so she was like, okay, good thing you didn't like need to go to, detox or anything like that. But I did four, and then from there, that was over a thousand days ago. I hit 1,000 days over the weekend, so that has kind of been my journey of building from there. Is community. It was continued healing with therapy. It was changing my relationships. It was discovering so much more about myself, the fact that I'm queer, and doing a lot of healing work internally. And then sobriety just was like this treasure chest of opportunity to, discover who I was, to move forward and to do new and different things, which led me to starting the podcast, to, applying to your program. And here we are now.
Wow. 1,000 days ago. That's remarkable. Like congratulations on the
Thank you.
milestone. I'm so excited to share it together with you. And it's like your healing journey. Now you become the expert.
Yeah.
And through all the hardness and the whys and the, different things that we have to struggle through, there's so much clarity on this other side. It's like because I'm meant to help other people with it, of course, of course. And
Yeah.
there's someone right now listening to your story that relates to like, oh my gosh, I haven't gone 2 days without drinking myself, right? And I hate my job. And I used to have such bigger ambitions when I was younger, and what happened? And I think
Yeah.
you said it and articulated it so beautifully, to really find these new tools for yourself, right? And so as you go through, let's say, like your first, I don't know, 100 days alcohol free,
Yeah.
what did you find to be, to go from being someone who needed alcohol to take the edge off almost every day?
Yeah.
What did you find to replace that?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was obviously a combination of new tools. So, community, sharing vulnerably with other people, books, podcasts like yours and others. But also, it was like a revamping of the same tools that I had, but looking at them in a different way. And basketball actually itself became a modality because before, I started doing a lot of this inner healing work. I would constantly go and play pickup, and all I would do is say, I could have done this better. I could have done this better. I should have made that shot. I should have won that game. And so it became this exhausting experience because I still was holding myself to the standard that I had when I was 20 and a training college athlete, not when I was in my 30s and just trying to get some exercise. And so, again, my therapist, who's definitely going to have a whole chapter in my book one day, but she was like, she said, what would it look like if you learned how to fail? And I like was like, I don't compute. Like, what does that mean? Like, as an athlete, as somebody who was constantly trying to be, on top and winning. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, what if you just like played basketball and didn't try to win or didn't try to use the same markers for success? What if your success was how much fun you had? What if your success was how good your body felt? What if your success was the connection you had with the other guys that you're playing with? And so it completely changed around the way I thought about that. Also, the same thing with movement in general. Working out became less of a punishment based thing and more of like a release technique, and also something I could do that was actually good for my body and my mental health. It became its own, healing source and modality. And also trying to implement new things like yoga because they're slower and there's really not a scoreboard and you can't really win at yoga. It's more about how do you feel and building that presence. So that, and then also non-alcoholic beverages played a huge role. I really enjoy non-alcoholic beverages, mocktails, but having something to at least kind of mimic that sense of like, I need this, but it's not going to be harmful or toxic to me. And so, obviously at the beginning, I drank a lot more non-alcoholic beverages than I do now, but it really was a helpful replacement for me.
Yeah. And now that you work with former athletes or athletes yourself
Mhm.
who are kind of navigating this similar journey, do you find that modality that you reintroduce again? I mean, it might not be basketball for them, but
Yeah.
do you find that as like an important pillar to use as the kind of the like analogy, as you said in the beginning of the show?
Yeah, I do. I think that, athletes are so creative and they see the game and thus the world in such a unique way. And so I think they're always looking for a new, fresh way to extract the most joy and extract the most out of anything that they're doing. So if we can take something that they love and not have to choose, reinvent the wheel, but help them to see it in a different way and help them to see it in a way that isn't about winning or losing or isn't solely about performance, it can really help them make that shift in their mind that this is something that is going to last much longer than if they win the pickup game or they win a race. But it's something that can actually, go with them for the rest of their life.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing it correctly, it's almost as if like high performance and excellence is still the goal, but we're
Yeah.
changing how we're measuring it. And instead of
Yeah.
making it so punishing and so hard on yourself and just getting that inner critic really loud and all the little voices that make us hate ourselves at the end of the day, it's rechanging your relationship with how you go about that striving for that excellence and that high performance. I love that. And I think that that's such a key part to the alcohol-free lifestyle and mingling it, I think, with sports. You have incredible podcasts about that. But, there's so much to be said about that striving for excellence through the example of athletics. And I think it can cut through, especially for people who like, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but maybe think the alcohol-free lifestyle is like wussy. You know what I mean?
I know what you're saying.
And see it as like, oh no, this is actually the total symbol of strength. This is like what the greats will do. And I think it's going to start to change that perception. And, you said in the beginning of the episode, like I grew up in the 90s and, drinking was everywhere. And obviously it is kind of different today. So like things are changing. I
Yeah.
read recently that it's 50% of Gen Z aren't drinking. They're alcohol free.
Wow. It's
Like
amazing.
crazy. Crazy, right? We're all going to be out of a job soon, which is amazing. That's the whole point. We want to change the world and see
Yeah.
this, function. But it's, I think for people of, your generation, my generation, and older, it's just there's so much in the subconscious we have to contend to and so much healing work to do around this. And really figure out what you truly want at the end of the day and what you're really going for. So I love that. I have another question for you. So,
Yeah.
as a queer woman, as a woman of color, what do you see as really needed for people who are on the more marginalized side of society to not only deal with mental health challenges, but also to navigate, changing a relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, it's something that isn't as highly known. Obviously I want to plug people like Dupe Witherick and Ray Donovan, who has the Stack and Day podcast, who highlights stories of people of color in particular. But I think that substance abuse among marginalized communities is higher because one, you don't see yourself represented in the larger scope of healing. And two, there's so many systemic and societal barriers there to actually seeing sobriety, alcohol free, sober curiosity as an option. And so I think it's really important for those of us who are alcohol free to step out kind of into that space and show that there is, there's another way to do it. Because, like I said, I grew up at a time where college basketball for women was such a huge like rocket ship. And so if I didn't see people like Diana Taurasi or Sue Bird, I probably would have never went and wanted to have the goal of playing in the college landscape, let alone the WNBA. And so I think the more visible and the more opportunities that those marginalized people have, it's just going to allow for a lot more healing. And also, I think it's important for those people to hear that you deserve as much time, healing, and attention as anybody else.
Yeah. Oh, that's really important. That's really special. And, I second that about representation. And I think it's so important that, you are taking that brave space and stepping out and building this community and, building a really, I think, status-based reason to go alcohol free too, because the way you're tying it with athletics isn't just like, oh, poor you, like let's fix you. It's like deeper than that, right? It has that like feeling of that competitiveness almost that you talked
Yeah.
about, and bringing in those inner desires around athleticism and winning and all that kind of stuff, I think is important. And it's so interesting because like I'm obviously a white woman, I have blonde hair, I fit some, some beauty standards, like technically, like I should see myself everywhere, but I have the same feeling because,
Mm,
I was born from immigrants and I'm a foreigner. So I really look up to, and I often, because my parents were so poor and, they came from a communist country and stuff, I still had these deep-seated beliefs that I can't succeed or I can't make money and stuff like that. And so when I see people, not just that look like me because they're white or have blonde hair, but that, oh, she's Eastern European, oh, she's Polish, oh, she's from this area of the country, oh, she came from like communism, something in my brain clicks so much more to be like, oh my God, I could do it too. Oh my gosh, it's possible.
yeah.
So it's just so fascinating. That's, I think, why we need more coaches out there, more leaders out there, because most people won't like hear it from me or Annie Grace or someone else. Like they need you, and
Mm,
you are taking up that step and that mantle to like be a leader in this space. And also for anyone else listening to this episode, and is already on the other side of their alcohol free journey and wants to become that leader for other people, whether it's the way you look, where you're from, what your stories are about, like your experiences, your personality, your interests, like all of that is only going to match a certain type of person out there in the world. And it doesn't exist today. And so, we need you. We need your voice. We need your, your wisdom out there. And so, I'm so happy that you're 5X certified now as a subconscious change
yeah.
expert from the program. And anyone else who's listening to this, do be sure to DM me if you want more information about the 5X certification. We are opening our doors. Like, I think by the time this episode airs, the doors will already be open. So be
Okay.
sure to, get some more information if you'd like. But Anne, tell us a little bit more. I think you'd be such an amazing coach to the people who are looking to kind of reinvent themselves after that identity loss that they have as athletes and really navigate an alcohol-free lifestyle in the most beautiful way. What are some of the most incredible resources you have for our listeners today?
Yeah, thanks so much, Caroline. I just want to say one quick thing too about kind of the idea of like alcohol free being like, like you said, wussy. Like it just makes me think of like what do we really adore our athletes for? Their ability to tolerate discomfort. And not only do they tolerate, but they choose it. And what is more brave, courageous than to choose a life where you're choosing consciously daily to show up for all of the world and all of the things that life throws at you without numbing. I can't think of anything more courageous or anything more bold and honestly, tough than to show up like that. Because most of the world doesn't in some way or another. And I think that's what separates, some of our athletes, whether it's like the Kobe Bryant mentality or other people, is they are able to handle things that other people choose not to. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
get that out there.
Yeah.
But as far as resources, I do have a Unleash Your Inner Mamba guide that's available. I sent you the link, so you can put that in the show notes. And also, if you're looking to learn more about Clean Play Coaching and all that we offer, I do have a free scouting report. So anybody who's looking to see if Clean Play Coaching might be a good fit. And then also you can check us out at the Clean Play podcast. And if you're looking to work with me, there's also more information on my website, cleanplaycoaching.com.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I love what you said about the real bravery, the real courage that it takes, and it's not wussy at all. It is truly embracing not only discomfort, but also your capacity to hold
Yeah.
things. It's just like someone who can't handle life without a drink at the end of the day. Like, really, what does that say or look like? And obviously, there's so many societal factors that
Right.
make it so, and healing and the subconscious and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when we're looking from a position of strength, that position of strength is capacity. Like, how much can I hold? Can I hold all the multiple insecurities and all the multiple, unknowns of the world, and that's hard to do as a human. And that's like really, obviously, really, really brave. And then as an entrepreneur, you double it.
Triplet, triplet.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, Anne, it's so amazing to talk to you today. We're going to be sure to have all your resources included in the
Awesome.
show notes. So if you want to connect with Anne, she is really, really making a movement in the alcohol-free space. She has, like I said, a very popular podcast with another leader, Chris Marshall. Her business is growing, and be sure to check out all her resources. And if you love sports and athletics, I think you're going to also really just love her, analogies and the way she frames things. It's just going to click in your brain faster. So, Anne, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolina.